Welcome to Nasdaq Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq, with daily insight on the Nasdaq-100 Index, or the NDX, which is made up of 100 of the largest domestic and international non-financial innovative companies listed on the Nasdaq stock market. The NDX has been the barometer for U.S. large-cap growth and also one of the best-performing indexes over the last decade and a half, not to mention one of the most liquid index ecosystems in the world. Joining me this afternoon, we have Ben Jones. He's a product development specialist with the index research team at NASDAQ. We're going to take a look at the index's relative strength and industry composition. Ben, welcome to Trade Talks. Great to have you join us.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
All right. Volatile week in the markets. What were you looking at in the Nasdaq-100?
Yeah, that's right. It certainly was a volatile week. We saw some weakness on Tuesday and Wednesday, and overall, it kind of permeated across U.S. equity markets. There were some bright spots, and that was primarily in the commodities market. If you look at just crude oil in general, it was up, double digits, up over 12% this week. If you shift your focus back to equities, the Nasdaq-100 was down about 1.37%. It looks like it's rallying a little bit near the end of today. But the S&P 500 is down over 2.5% for the week. Again, a lot of that weakness, Jill, occurring kind of that Tuesday, Wednesday time period when the Nasdaq-100 was down over 2% on Tuesday. So it's interesting to see how this comes off of what was really a strong week last week, right, when the Nasdaq-100 gained over 5.7%, and we saw about 6 straight days of gains for that index. So it looks like the index might close down for the week, but overall, as we talked about over the last few weeks, there's still just a lot of positive momentum present within the market and present within the Nasdaq-100.
That's for sure. Let's pull up our first chart here where we take a look at relative strength. We can clearly see that outperformance.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, what you see in these charts is basically a simple relative strength chart where we compare the Nasdaq-100 index against another benchmark. In this case, on the left-hand side, you can see how the Nasdaq-100 compares against the S&P 500. And, as this chart rises, it basically shows you, that the Nasdaq-100 has been outperforming the S&P 500. This looks at a 5-year time period. And again, it's really interesting how a lot of that positive momentum started to occur at the end of 2016, right? When we kind of had that, that Trump rally, so to speak, really started to favor the growth stocks. But what's interesting here is that, these are 2 large cap indexes. You have the Nasdaq-100 and the S&P 500. But what's really interesting is we look at how these 2 indexes have done against smaller sized areas. There's just massive dispersion, right? I think that's what I think to some technical strategists is concerning is that, large cap is, so to speak, leading the market. This week we saw some of the major small and mid cap indexes down over, 6% and 8% as well in some of the mid cap space. So we continue to see large cap strengthening over small cap. We continue to see the Nasdaq-100 strengthening over the S&P 500. Another important relationship that a lot of strategists look at and use in various model strategies is how a particular index or segment of the market is doing against cash, right? The risk-free rate of return, the most defensive, safe, liquid asset out there. We look at how the Nasdaq-100 has performed against cash, right? So this is looking at the Nasdaq-100 index against the Nasdaq US T-bill index. You can see when this relative strength chart dips, right? That's a period of relative underperformance when the Nasdaq-100 is underperforming cash, essentially, right? You can see it occurred in that late 2018 correction and how it just, dropped quite quickly during the Corona crash, so to speak, or the correction that we experienced in the month of March. The important thing here, Jill, is that how has the Nasdaq-100 responded, right? When you look on that far right-hand side of that relative strength chart, you basically see that spike back up, right? And so to the point where this particular relative strength relationship is almost getting back to kind of its highs of 2020, right? So we're seeing some improvement of the index relative to cash as well. And that's just another positive sign when we think about just the relative strength that's present within this index against other asset classes.
All right. Well, then let's talk about the composition of the Nasdaq-100 because we hear a lot it's a tech index and that's why it's doing so well. But that's not really true. There's a number of other industries that are representative.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And this is one reason why I wanted to highlight, kind of this concept today, right? Where, we see a banner year performance on a relative basis for the index. You've seen how it's been quite resilient coming off of those, March 2020 lows. But it's not just tech, right? It's not just technology. Yes, the index is over, 50% tech. You can see it's about 56.6% today. But there are other important sectors that this index has an allocation to, so to speak, right? Where it has a weighting of about 7.6% to healthcare. And these are the names that are these companies that are fighting COVID-19, right? That it could be household names next year, right? But there's also consumer services, right? Where over 20% of the index is in the consumer services sector. And that's just, looking at two, right? It has exposure to other areas like utilities and telecommunications and industrial. So it is a fairly diversified index, and it's not just tech. So overall, we think about how this index has performed over time and what is leading it to these strong, relative strength relationships. It's essentially because of the weighting towards technology and healthcare and consumer services and all these other sectors.
All right, Ben. Thanks so much for the insight. Great to have you on Trade Talks.
Thank you.
All right, and thanks for joining me. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.